Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. This week I read an interesting article by Brian Neimeier. I think that's how the name is pronounced anyway. Correct me in the comments if I pronounced it incorrectly. The primary focus of this article was the complaint that people just want Hollywood to make good movies again. Now, Brian characterized this as people wanting Hollywood to select their entertainment for them again. Or more broadly, a desire for a culturally accepted authority to tell them what is good and bad entertainment. This is a sentiment I have seen repeated many times over the last 5 to 10 years, in increasing numbers as more and more people have become disenchanted with our modern entertainment avenues. In contrast to this, I recently watched a review by James Krake of an independently published fantasy novel in which he complained a great deal about the quality of that novel. The novel in question was Razor Fist's The Long Moonlight, a novel I haven't read personally. So I can neither confirm nor deny the relevance of Crake's complaints, but they seem very well thought out, and based on the comments I saw under his video, many other people who read the book agreed with the validity of them. They just did not weigh these flaws as heavily as Krake did when evaluating the book. Krake put out a call for a better quality control of the media being put out in the indie sphere by the Iron Age movement in order to stand up to the quality of entertainment that people are expecting. Note that he did not say the quality of entertainment in the mainstream, but rather the quality of entertainment people are expecting. And that note is the crux that I want to discuss today. There is a common belief, largely brought in the last century and a half as part of the progressive movement, that any institution that exists only to control thought. It exists to tell you what to think. That is a very common mindset, especially today. Most people have been brought up with a progressive popular culture. Especially in the 80s and 90s, rebellion against institutions was the norm. Everyone was taught it was the correct way to go about setting up your viewpoints. Now, some people rebelled against that. Some people said, well, that's just an institutional point of view. And the vast majority of people just absorbed that way of thinking, and they now apply it in their day-to-day life. And there is some merit to this particular progressive nostrum. People do look to institutions under the assumption that if they've existed for a long time, they must be doing something right. After all, entropy dictates that something that cannot sustain itself will naturally fall apart. However, this also neglects the question, how did these institutions get to be where they are in the first place? The progressive answer is that they got there because some powerful people built them to control us, and until we reject their narratives, we will never get anywhere. However, I feel this simply pushes the question back a step. How did these powerful people acquire their power? Were they set up by more powerful people, and on, back to the beginning of the universe when God reached down and anointed his chosen people to rule the world forevermore? I don't think so. I mean, I can't rule it out, but I don't think that's what happened. I am a chivalrist. I believe that carrying out your responsibilities is the way you make yourself stronger and more able to affect the world around you. If you cannot bear out responsibilities, you will only grow weaker, and the world around you will eventually crush you. So, at some point in this Hollywood system, someone must have been carrying out their responsibilities to good storytelling in order to grow as powerful and influential as they are now. Even if they were invested in by some wealthy and powerful people, that investment would have been wasted if the people of Hollywood were lazy and incompetent. And in fact, that's what we see happening in Hollywood right now. Many of the people in Hollywood now are lazy and incompetent, and their power is rapidly waning. Their wealth is fading fast. But people in general are slow to let go of the things they have grown comfortable with. They miss the days when the things they knew and loved were managed by responsible, hardworking people. This is the note that I think the progressive mindset about institutions misses. And unfortunately, in his article, I think Neimeier also missed it. He complains about Angel Studios and the Daily Wire, quote-unquote, line jumping. These people, after all, have gotten a great deal of success to their storytelling endeavors. And yet it looks like they haven't put in as much time and work as a lot of people in the indie sphere have. Now, as someone who has been an independent writer for the last 15 years and has been struggling to get my name out there, I can really sympathize with that sentiment. It is really frustrating to see a lot of people from the dying mainstream that you feel haven't managed stories very well jump out and then suck up all the oxygen in the independent sphere. Ask anyone in indie comics how they felt when all of the pros left the mainstream big two and took over Comicsgate. But in order to understand why this happens, you have to understand the complaints of one James Krake. You see, if you go and you watch Krake's video on The Long Moonlight, almost all of his complaints are about very simple things. Things like punctuation and bad grammar, characterization that may have made sense to the author, but not to the reader. These are very simple things that any writer knows about, but no writer can really eliminate on their own. You see, in order to get these problems ironed out of your stories, you need editors, you need alpha readers, you need beta readers. You need to be willing to sink the time and the money and the effort into going through your story with a fine-toothed comb and changing it from a good first draft to a well-honed story. You see, independent publishing is always going to be a niche business. And there's nothing wrong with that. Being niche is an advantage in many cases. But it also has its drawbacks. There isn't as much time or money in a year to focus on getting things worked out. Believe me, I know. I think the best and certainly the most ambitious story I've ever written is Burning Bright. But because I was trying to do so much in that story, when I got the story notes back on it, they were very deep and they required me to put a lot of extra work in. And in fact, I'm still doing that work because I also have other stories I want to work on. I need to keep something of a presence on the internet so that I have an audience to eventually share this story with. And I have to work a day job because I got bills to pay. It's hard. It's time consuming. It is a big fiscal investment. There are a lot of people out there that don't put all of that time and money into telling a story, and they will probably tell pretty good stories. Those stories will appeal to the niche audiences they target. But if you want those really big, high-quality, mainstream stories, you need something really good, something really polished, something really high quality. And for a long time, Hollywood offered that. They don't anymore. Everyone recognizes that. But what people miss is not so much the authority to tell people a story is good or bad. They miss knowing that something was quality because it came from a certain place. For example, the Nintendo seal of quality does say an awful lot about how buggy a game is going to be, i.e., not very, about the kind of mechanical tightness and the replayability of a title you purchase. That is partly because Nintendo has become an authority on good games, at least good games of a certain type. But it's also because Nintendo has always put the time and the money and the work into creating those games of very high quality. I'm sure that, like Hollywood, eventually there will come a day when Nintendo will not deserve that reputation any longer. But I don't think we're there yet, unlike in Hollywood. There are also a lot of indie studios that are putting a lot of time and effort and focus into making games similar to the kinds of games Nintendo makes. But it's very hard for these studios to equal the quality of a Nintendo title. They just don't have the experience, the money, or the time to invest in their titles that Nintendo does. Thus, none of these studios are likely to be as well known or well liked as Nintendo. At least not until Nintendo collapses, and not for several years after that. They're going to have to build up the market share and the monetary capital and the experience and the time to create the kinds of games that will rival Nintendo titles. They're going to have to build up a reputation for doing it consistently, and the games are going to have to be fun. Now, an author like Andrew Klavan, who has extensive experience writing and publishing in places like Hollywood and in the general publishing market, has a lot of connections. He has a lot of experience. And with the backing of the Daily Wire, he also has the financial stability to make really good stories. That's not line jumping. That is not an authority telling you a story is good. That is just somebody who has mastered the craft continuing to apply their skills in a venue that lets them make the most of them. If we in the indie sphere want to answer the criticisms of James Krake, and I think we should, we're going to have to develop that experience and those personal connections. Let me stop here to give a quick shout out to Kat Rocha and Michael Kritzer, who offer really good story editing services at a reasonable price, and Daniel P. Riley, who is a really good line editor, again, at a reasonable price that makes these services very accessible to small-time authors such as myself. And eventually, we're going to have to look at creating the financial stability and safety nets necessary for authors to really experiment without having to devote a ton of their time to self-promotion and constant YouTube grind, or a safety net to take risks and not completely lose their careers if those risks don't pan out. Those are very difficult issues to address. And I think the people closest to doing that are probably people like Eric July, who is very much an independent worker, but also has lines of connection through mainstream media. Even July did not leverage his connections as well as he could on his first release for the Rippaverse, at least in my opinion. If you watched my review of that, you know I think it really needed an editing pass, at least one, to clean up the dialogue and perhaps make the characterization a little bit clearer. Not to mention a couple of passes for the art to make some of those action sequences flow a little bit better. And I know those sound like nitpicks, but believe me, in the eyes of the general public, if you want that broad appeal, you need to work out those little things, because they really are the difference between a good story for a niche audience and a great story for all audiences. Many people will tell you that trying to appeal to a wide audience undermines much of your story, but that's not true. Look at some of the most successful media franchises of the last couple of decades. A Game of Thrones, The Expanse, The Walking Dead. These are all in niche genres, but they are so well executed that they have broad appeal. Focus on polishing your execution, and you will be the equal of those big names given enough time. After all, Mario was born in a warehouse from a couple of guys using secondhand parts, but it took years of iteration to polish that idea into the first Super Mario game. Once that game existed, it was a simple thing for Nintendo to push Atari into the trash heap of history. But they would have never had the strength to do it if they hadn't first polished their craft to perfection. And if you want to read some stories from people who are polishing their craft, check out the Anvil Magazine crowdfunding campaign down in the comments below. You'll find several great authors publishing stories there, myself included, and a whopping 3 indie comics. You can get it in digital or print, so go ahead and give it a look if indie media is something you're really passionate about. Let me know what you thought about today's topic down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk